The rain came down in sheets so thick that Faye Anderson could barely see the faces of the men gathered around the wooden platform where she stood shivering, her dress clinging to her skin as the auctioneer's voice cut through the storm like a knife through butter. She had never imagined her life would come to this, standing in the mud-soaked center of Fort Stockton, Texas in the autumn of 1878, being sold off like livestock to pay her dead father's gambling debts. "What am I bid for this fine young woman?" The auctioneer shouted, his words slurring together as whiskey mixed with rainwater on his breath. "Strong back, good teeth, barely 20 years old. She can cook, clean, and do whatever else needs doing around your ranch." Faye's hands trembled as she wrapped her arms around herself, trying to maintain some dignity even as her long auburn hair hung in wet ropes down her back. The men below leered up at her, their eyes hungry and calculating. She recognized most of them from the saloons and gambling halls, where her father had spent his final years drinking himself to death. Not one of them would treat her with kindness or respect. They all knew what this auction really meant, even if the law pretended it was about honest work and debt settlement. $50, called out a voice from the back, and Faye's stomach turned. It was Silas McGraw, a cruel rancher known for working his hired hands until they dropped and treating women even worse. "60, shouted another man, this one missing half his teeth. The auctioneer grinned, pleased with the bidding war beginning to take shape. "Now we're talking, gentlemen." "Do I hear 70? Faye closed her eyes, rain streaming down her face like tears she refused to shed in front of these men. Her father had been a good man once, before her mother died of fever 5 years ago. After that, he'd lost himself in cards and whiskey, running up debts all over West Texas. When he'd collapsed outside the saloon 3 weeks ago and never woken up, Faye had discovered the full extent of his borrowing. The creditors had given her 2 choices: auction or jail for theft of borrowed money. At least this way, she'd be free in 7 years when the debt was paid. 75, Silas called out, his voice full of triumph. Faye's heart sank further. 7 years with that monster would break her completely. $100. The new voice was different from the others, deeper and calmer, cutting through the chaos without needing to shout. Faye's eyes snapped open, searching the crowd for the speaker. The other men parted slightly, revealing a tall figure standing at the edge of the gathering, rain dripping from the brim of his black hat. "Well now," the auctioneer said, surprise evident in his tone. "Mr. Grayson Oakley, I didn't expect to see you at an auction like this." The man stepped forward, and Faye got her first clear look at him. He was probably in his mid-20s, with strong shoulders and a weathered face that spoke of years working under the Texas sun. His eyes, dark and serious, met hers briefly before returning to the auctioneer. $100 is my bid, he repeated, his voice steady. Silas McGraw pushed through the crowd, anger reddening his face. 125. 150, Grayson said without hesitation. 200, Silas snarled. The crowd had gone quiet now, everyone watching the standoff between the 2 men. Faye's pulse raced. She didn't know this Grayson Oakley, but anything had to be better than Silas McGraw. Grayson reached into his coat and pulled out a leather wallet. $300, cash, right now. Final offer. Gasps rippled through the crowd. $300 was more than most men earned in half a year. The auctioneer's eyes went wide with greed, but he had to at least give Silas a chance to counter. "Mr. McGraw." Silas's face had gone purple with rage, but even he wasn't foolish enough to bid higher. 300 was already absurd. He spat into the mud and stormed away, shouldering past Grayson as he went. "Sold to Mr. Oakley," the auctioneer declared, banging his gavel against the wooden post. "Come collect your purchase and the papers." Faye's knees felt weak as the auctioneer gestured for her to step down from the platform. Her bare feet squished in the mud as she descended the 3 wooden steps, trying not to slip. Grayson moved forward, and for a moment she thought he might grab her roughly as the other men would have, but instead he shrugged off his long coat and draped it around her shoulders. The warmth of the fabric, still holding his body heat, made her realize just how cold she'd been standing in the rain. She looked up at him in surprise, but his attention was on the auctioneer, counting out bills with quick, efficient movements. "The papers," Grayson said when he finished. The auctioneer handed over a rolled document, already soaked from the rain. 7 years of labor to satisfy the debt of Thomas Anderson. May he rest in peace. The girl is bound to you by law until the debt is paid or you release her. Grayson took the papers without reading them and tucked them inside his vest. Then he turned to Faye, and she saw his eyes up close for the first time. They were brown, almost black, with flecks of gold that caught what little light remained in the stormy afternoon sky. "Can you ride?" he asked. His directness caught her off guard. "Yes, sir. Don't call me sir. My name is Grayson." He gestured toward a black horse tied to the post outside the general store. "That's Midnight. He's gentle enough for 2 riders in weather like this." Faye pulled his coat tighter around herself and followed him through the mud. The few people still lingering in the street watched with obvious curiosity. She could hear their whispers, speculation about what Grayson Oakley wanted with an auctioned woman when everyone knew he kept to himself on his ranch north of town. Grayson untied Midnight and swung up into the saddle with practiced ease. Then he reached down, offering his hand to Faye. She hesitated only a moment before taking it, allowing him to pull her up behind him. She had to wrap her arms around his waist to keep from sliding off, and she felt the solid muscle beneath his wet shirt. "Hold tight," he said, and then they were moving, Midnight's hooves splashing through the flooded streets as they left Fort Stockton behind. The ride was long and uncomfortable, rain pelting them from every direction as they headed north into open country. Faye kept her face pressed against Grayson's back, trying to use his body as a windbreak. He didn't speak, and neither did she. Both of them focused on enduring the storm. After what felt like hours but was probably closer to 45 minutes, buildings appeared through the curtain of rain. A ranch house, a barn, several outbuildings, all well-maintained and sturdy. Grayson guided Midnight straight to the barn, where they finally escaped the worst of the weather. Inside, the sound of rain on the roof was almost deafening, but at least they were out of the direct assault. Grayson dismounted first, then helped Faye down. Her legs were stiff from the cold and the ride, and she stumbled slightly. His hand steadied her elbow. "You need dry clothes and hot food," he said, stating the obvious but somehow making it sound like a plan rather than a criticism. "I'll tend to Midnight, then we'll get you inside." Faye watched as he efficiently removed the saddle and began rubbing down the horse with handfuls of straw. His movements were confident and practiced, someone who'd done this thousands of times. She stood there shivering in his coat, unsure what to say or do. "Why did you bid on me?" The question came out before she could stop it. Grayson paused in his work, glancing at her over Midnight's back. "Because Silas McGraw was going to win otherwise. You know him. Everyone knows him." Grayson resumed his rubbing. "He's got 3 graves on his property from women who died under mysterious circumstances while working for him. The law won't touch him because his brother is the territorial judge." Faye's blood ran cold. She'd heard rumors about Silas, but nothing that specific. "So you saved me," she said quietly. "I kept you from a bad situation." He led Midnight to a stall and secured the gate. Whether that counts as saving remains to be seen. He grabbed a lantern from a hook and lit it with a match from his pocket. The warm glow pushed back some of the gloom as he gestured for her to follow him to the house. They dashed across the open space between buildings, getting soaked again in the process. And then they were on a covered porch, and Grayson was pushing open a heavy wooden door. The interior of the house was simple but clean. A main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace taking up most of one wall. 2 doors led to what Faye assumed were bedrooms. Everything was neat and organized, not what she'd expected from a bachelor rancher. "Wait here," Grayson said, setting the lantern on a table. He disappeared into one of the bedrooms and returned a moment later with a bundle of clothes. "These were my mother's. She passed 2 years ago, but I kept some of her things. You're about the same size." Faye took the clothes, feeling the softness of worn cotton and wool. "Thank you. You can change in there." He pointed to the bedroom he'd just come from. "I'll get the fire going and start some coffee." She nodded and hurried into the room, closing the door behind her. The bedroom was sparse, just a bed with a patchwork quilt, a dresser, and a washstand. She peeled off her soaked dress, hanging it over the back of a chair near the window, then dried herself as best she could with a towel she found on the washstand before putting on the dry clothes. The dress fit reasonably well, maybe a little loose in some places and a little tight in others, but it was warm and dry, and that was all that mattered. There were thick socks, too, which she pulled on gratefully. Her feet had been numb since the auction. When she emerged, Grayson had changed as well, now wearing dry denim pants and a clean shirt. He was kneeling by the fireplace, coaxing flames from kindling and logs. The coffee pot sat on a metal hook over the growing fire. "Better?" he asked without turning around. "Much, thank you." He stood and brushed off his hands. "Food will take longer, but I can make some biscuits and beans if you're hungry." "I don't want to be any trouble." Now he did turn to look at her, and there was something in his expression she couldn't quite read. "You're not trouble. You're a person who's had a hard day and needs help. That's all." His words were so matter-of-fact, so free of the leering undertones she'd heard from the men at the auction, that Faye felt something tight in her chest begin to loosen. Maybe this wouldn't be as bad as she'd feared. "I can help with the food," she offered. "You said I'm here to work off my father's debt. I might as well start." Grayson studied her for a moment. "You're exhausted and half-frozen. Food preparation can wait until tomorrow. Tonight you rest." "But the contract says you work for me for 7 years. It doesn't say you start while you can barely stand upright." He moved to a cupboard and pulled out 2 tin cups. "Sit down before you fall down." Faye realized he was right. Now that the adrenaline of the auction and the ride had worn off, exhaustion was crashing over her like another wave of rain. She sank into one of the wooden chairs at the table, grateful for the support. Grayson poured coffee into both cups and brought one to her. The warmth seeped into her cold fingers as she wrapped them around the tin. She sipped carefully, the bitter liquid sending heat down her throat and into her stomach. "Thank you," she said again, knowing she sounded repetitive but not sure what else to say. He sat across from her, his own cup cradled in work-roughened hands. "Tell me about yourself." The question surprised her. "What do you want to know?" "Whatever you want to tell me. You'll be living here for the next 7 years. Seems like we should know something about each other." Faye stared into her coffee, watching steam curl up into the air. "There's not much to tell. I grew up here in Fort Stockton. My mother died 5 years ago, my father 3 weeks ago. In between, I kept house for him and tried to keep him from drinking himself to death. I failed at that last part." "Addiction is stronger than willpower," Grayson said quietly. "That's not your failure." "He was a good man before," Faye continued, the words spilling out now that she'd started. "He taught me to read and write, made sure I could do arithmetic." My mother taught me to cook and sew and all the things women are supposed to know. We were happy, or at least I thought we were. Then the fever came through town and took her, and something in my father broke. He couldn't stand to be sober anymore because then he'd have to feel the grief. So he drank, and when drinking wasn't enough distraction, he gambled. And here we are. Here we are, Grayson echoed. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "My parents built this ranch from nothing. My father died in a stampede when I was 15. My mother ran the place for another 8 years before her heart gave out. Now it's just me and 2 hired hands who come during the busy seasons." "That must be lonely," he shrugged. "I'm used to it. I've got the horses and cattle for company. Animals aren't the same as people. Sometimes they're better." The fire crackled and popped, and outside the rain continued its relentless assault on the roof. Faye sipped her coffee and studied Grayson across the table. He was handsome in a rugged, weathered way, with a strong jaw and those unusual eyes. But more than his appearance, there was something about his presence that made her feel safe. He'd had every opportunity to take advantage of her situation, and instead he'd given her dry clothes and hot coffee and asked her questions like she mattered. "What will my duties be?" she asked, trying to sound businesslike. "General housekeeping, cooking, laundry, that sort of thing. Maybe help with the chickens and the garden when spring comes. Nothing you can't handle from what I've observed." "That's it, no." She couldn't quite bring herself to say the words. Understanding crossed his face. "No. Whatever those men at the auction were thinking when they bid on you, that's not happening here. You work, I provide room and board, and in 7 years you're free to go. That's the arrangement." Relief flooded through her so powerfully that tears sprang to her eyes. She blinked them back quickly, not wanting him to see her cry. "I should probably make up some biscuits," Grayson said, standing. "You need food even if you're not hungry." He moved around the kitchen with efficient competence, mixing flour and lard and buttermilk into dough, shaping it into rough rounds and placing them in a Dutch oven that he hung over the fire. Then he opened a can of beans and dumped them into a pot to warm. Faye watched him work, fascinated by the domestic ease of this rough rancher. Most men she knew couldn't boil water without help. "You're good at that," she observed. "I've had a lot of practice living alone." 20 minutes later, they were eating hot biscuits and beans by the fire, the simple food tasting better than anything Faye could remember eating in months. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until the first bite hit her stomach. "There's more if you want it," Grayson said, gesturing to the pot. "This is plenty, more than plenty." She hesitated, then added, "I'll do better tomorrow. Proper meals, not just biscuits and beans." "Nothing wrong with biscuits and beans. Still, I can cook better than this. My mother taught me well. I look forward to it." He finished his own plate and set it aside. "You should get some sleep. Tomorrow will be a long day getting you settled in." Faye stood, swaying slightly with exhaustion. "Where should I sleep?" "You take my room. I'll sleep out here by the fire." "I can't take your bed. You can and you will. It's warmer in there and you need the rest." His tone left no room for argument. Too tired to fight, Faye nodded and headed for the bedroom. At the door, she paused and turned back. "Grayson." He looked up from where he was spreading a bedroll near the fire. "Thank you for everything." His expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Get some sleep, Faye." She closed the door and climbed into the bed, pulling the heavy quilt up to her chin. The mattress was stuffed with straw and corn husks, crackling slightly as she settled, but it was comfortable and the blankets were warm. Outside, the rain continued, but in here she was dry and safe and, against all odds, hopeful. She fell asleep listening to the storm and didn't dream at all. Morning came with pale sunlight filtering through the bedroom window. Faye woke slowly, disoriented at first by the unfamiliar surroundings. Then memory returned. The auction, the ride, Grayson's unexpected kindness. She sat up, noting that someone had retrieved her wet dress and hung it properly to dry on a line strung across one corner of the room. The dress was still damp, but no longer dripping. She rose and dressed in the borrowed clothes again, finger combing her hair as best she could without a proper brush. When she opened the bedroom door, she found Grayson already awake, standing at the kitchen counter slicing bread. "Morning," he said without turning around. "There's fresh water in the pitcher if you want to wash up." "Thank you." She moved to the washstand near the door and cleaned her face and hands, feeling more human with each passing moment. "What time is it?" "About 7. I've already fed the horses and collected the eggs." He gestured to a basket on the table containing at least a dozen brown eggs. "Thought you might want to show me what you can do with breakfast." Faye felt a flicker of nervousness. This was her first real test, her chance to prove she could hold up her end of the bargain. "I'll need to see what supplies you have. Help yourself." She opened the cupboards one by one, taking inventory. Flour, sugar, salt, lard, dried beans, canned vegetables, coffee, tea, cornmeal, molasses. The root cellar, which Grayson showed her through a trapdoor in the floor, contained potatoes, onions, carrots, and some wrinkled apples. It was more than she'd expected, enough to make a variety of meals. "I can work with this," she said, already planning the meal in her head. "Give me 30 minutes." She set to work with focused intensity, cracking eggs into a bowl, slicing potatoes thin for frying, mixing batter for johnny cakes. Grayson stayed out of her way, sitting at the table and drinking coffee while he cleaned and oiled a rifle. The domesticity of the scene struck Faye as almost surreal after the nightmare of yesterday. True to her word, 30 minutes later, she set plates on the table. Fried eggs with intact yolks, crispy potatoes seasoned with salt and onion, golden johnny cakes with molasses for drizzling. Grayson set aside his rifle and picked up his fork, cutting into the eggs. Faye watched nervously as he took the first bite, his eyebrows rose slightly. "This is good, really good." Pride warmed her chest. "My mother's recipes." They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes before Grayson said, "I need to ride out and check the fence line in the north pasture today. You can come with me if you want to see the property, or you can stay here and get familiar with the house. Your choice." Faye considered. Part of her wanted to hide inside where it felt safe, but another part knew she needed to understand the full scope of where she'd be living for the next 7 years. "I'll come with you if that's all right." "Fine by me. We'll leave in an hour." After breakfast, Faye cleaned up the dishes while Grayson prepared supplies for the ride. She found a rhythm in the simple tasks, washing and drying the tin plates and cups, putting away the leftover food, wiping down the table. By the time she finished, Grayson was ready, 2 horses saddled and waiting outside. "That's Rosie," he said, pointing to a gentle-looking chestnut mare. "She's calm and steady, good for a long ride." Faye approached the horse slowly, letting Rosie sniff her hand before stroking the velvety nose. "Hello, girl." Grayson helped her mount, his hands respectful and brief on her waist as he boosted her into the saddle. Then he swung up onto midnight and they set off across the ranch. The storm had passed completely, leaving behind a world washed clean and bright. The sky stretched endlessly blue overhead, and the air smelled of wet earth and sage. Faye breathed deeply, feeling some of the tension of the past weeks begin to ease from her shoulders. "How much land do you have?" she asked as they rode. "About 800 acres. It's not the biggest spread in Texas, but it's mine free and clear. No banknotes, no partners." There was pride in his voice, and Faye understood why. In a time when most ranchers were heavily indebted, owning land outright was an achievement. They rode for almost an hour, Grayson pointing out landmarks and boundaries. He showed her the creek that ran through the property, swollen now from the rain but usually just a trickle in the dry seasons. He showed her the summer pasture where he moved the cattle when the grass grew tall. He showed her the old line shack his father had built, now mostly used for storage. "You run this whole place by yourself?" Faye asked, awed by the scope of it. "I hire help during branding and roundup. The rest of the time, yes, mostly alone." "That's incredible." He shrugged as if it were nothing, but she saw the hint of a smile at the corner of his mouth. They reached the north fence line and dismounted to inspect it. Several posts had been weakened by the rain and needed reinforcing. Grayson pulled tools from his saddlebag and went to work while Faye watched, learning the process. He didn't seem to mind her questions, answering each one with patience. "Hand me that hammer," he said at one point, and she did, their fingers brushing briefly in the exchange. Something sparked at the contact, a warmth that had nothing to do with the sun overhead. Faye pulled her hand back quickly, confused by the sensation. If Grayson noticed, he didn't show it, just continued working on the fence post. They stopped for lunch by the creek, eating jerky and hard biscuits Grayson had packed. The water burbled pleasantly over smooth stones, and a hawk circled lazily in the sky above them. "This is beautiful," Faye said, meaning it. After years in dusty Fort Stockton, the open range felt like freedom. "It's home," Grayson agreed. He was leaning back against a tree trunk, his hat tipped low over his eyes. "I was born in that house. I'll probably die there too. That's a long time from now, I hope, God willing." He pushed his hat back and looked at her. "What about you? What did you dream about before all this happened?" The question caught her off guard. No one had asked her about dreams in years. "I don't know anymore. When I was younger, I thought I might be a teacher. I loved books and learning. But then my mother got sick, and after she died, I was just trying to get through each day. Dreams felt like a luxury I couldn't afford." "Maybe you can afford them again after 7 years. Maybe." She picked at a blade of grass, thinking, "I'll be 27 then. Not exactly young anymore." 27 isn't old. For a woman it is. People will wonder why I'm not married, if I'll ever be useful for anything besides cooking and cleaning. Grayson was quiet for a long moment. People wonder too much about things that aren't their business. You want to be a teacher at 27, 37, 47, that's your choice and no one else's. His words settled something in Faye's chest, a knot she hadn't even known was there. "Thank you for saying that. It's just the truth." They rode back to the ranch in the late afternoon, both tired but satisfied with the day's work. Faye made dinner: roasted chicken from the hen house, boiled potatoes, carrots cooked with butter and herbs. Grayson praised every bite, and she could tell he genuinely meant it. After dinner, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Grayson smoked a pipe, the sweet tobacco smell mixing with the evening air. Faye found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't in months, maybe years. "I was afraid," she admitted quietly. "At the auction, I was terrified of what would happen to me. That's understandable, but you made it not terrible, you made it almost normal." He removed the pipe from his mouth and looked at her. "You're not property, Faye. I don't care what that paper says. You're a person who deserves respect and kindness. That's how I was raised, and that's how I'll treat you." Tears pricked her eyes again, but this time she didn't try to hide them. "I don't know how to repay that kind of decency." "You don't repay it. You just accept it and maybe pass it along someday when you can." They sat together until full dark, then went inside. Grayson insisted again that Faye take the bedroom while he slept by the fire. She protested less this time, already beginning to understand that arguing with him on matters of her comfort was futile. That night, lying in the darkness, Faye thought about the strange turn her life had taken. Yesterday she'd been on an auction block. Today she was falling asleep in a warm bed after a day of honest work. And Grayson Oakley, the quiet rancher who'd spent a small fortune to buy her contract, was unlike any man she'd ever known. She wondered what the next 7 years would bring. The days settled into a rhythm. Faye woke early and made breakfast while Grayson tended the horses and livestock. After eating, he would head out to work on various ranch tasks, mending fences, checking on cattle, clearing brush. Sometimes Faye went with him, learning the land and the work. Other times she stayed at the house, cleaning, cooking, doing laundry, and maintaining the household. It was hard work, but it was honest, and Faye found satisfaction in it. She also found herself noticing things about Grayson she hadn't at first. The way he was always gentle with the animals, even when they were being stubborn. The way he hummed old hymns while he worked, probably not even aware he was doing it. The way his face transformed on the rare occasions when he truly smiled, years seeming to fall away and revealing the younger man underneath. She noticed, too, the way he looked at her sometimes, when he thought she wasn't paying attention. Not with the hungry, possessive looks she'd seen at the auction, but with something softer, more curious. Like he was trying to figure out a puzzle but wasn't quite sure how the pieces fit together. 3 weeks into her time at the ranch, a rider appeared on the horizon. Faye was hanging laundry when she spotted him, and instinctive fear tightened her chest. Grayson was out in the far pasture and wouldn't hear if she called. The rider got closer, and she recognized the sheriff's star on his vest. She relaxed slightly. Whatever this was, it was official business, not a random drifter. "Afternoon, miss," the sheriff said, tipping his hat as he reined in his horse. He was an older man with a gray mustache and tired eyes. "Is Grayson Oakley around? He's checking the cattle. Should be back within the hour." "Can I help you with something, Sheriff?" "You must be Faye Anderson." It wasn't a question. "I'm Sheriff Tom Brennan. Just wanted to check in, make sure everything is square here." Faye understood what he was really asking. "Mr. Oakley has been nothing but respectful and fair." "I have no complaints." The sheriff studied her carefully. "You're not just saying that because you think you have to. I'm saying it because it's true." He nodded slowly. "All right then. But if that changes, you come to me, understand?" "I don't care what that auction paper says. There are still laws about how people can be treated." "Thank you, Sheriff. I'll remember that." He tipped his hat again and rode off, leaving Faye standing in the yard with a basket of wet laundry and a strange warmth in her chest. Even the law, such as it was out here, was keeping an eye on her welfare. She wasn't as alone as she'd thought. When Grayson returned and she told him about the visit, he just nodded. "Sheriff Brennan is a good man. He checks on anyone in an indenture situation. Lost his own sister to a bad arrangement years back, so he takes it seriously." He seemed satisfied with what I told him. "And what did you tell him?" "The truth. That you've treated me with nothing but respect." Something flickered in Grayson's eyes, but all he said was, "Good. That's as it should be." That night after dinner, Grayson surprised her by pulling a wooden crate from the corner of the room where it had been covered with a blanket. "What's that?" Faye asked. "Books. My mother's collection. I noticed you looking at the shelf in the bedroom, so I thought you might want more selection." Faye's heart leaped. She'd seen the 3 books on the bedroom shelf, a Bible, a farmer's almanac, and a collection of Shakespeare's plays, but she'd already read all of them twice. "Really?" "I can read them, of course. They're just collecting dust otherwise." She knelt beside the crate and began pulling out volumes. Poetry by Wordsworth and Tennyson. Novels by Dickens and the Bronte sisters. A collection of American folk tales. A history of the Roman Empire. At least 20 books in all. "These are wonderful," she breathed, clutching a copy of Jane Eyre to her chest. My mother was a reader. Insisted on having books even when that meant doing without other things. She always said a mind without books was like a field without seed, nothing could grow there. She sounds like a remarkable woman. She was. There was old grief in his voice, but also warmth. I think she would have liked you. Faye looked up at him, surprised by the admission. Why do you say that? She appreciated people who worked hard and didn't complain, people who found beauty in simple things. He cleared his throat, suddenly seeming uncomfortable. Anyway, the books are yours to enjoy. Take your time with them. Thank you, Grayson. This is the best gift anyone's given me in years. That night, she stayed up late reading by lamplight, lost in the world of Jane Eyre and her complicated romance with Mr. Rochester. She found herself drawing parallels she probably shouldn't, a young woman in a difficult position, a complicated man who wasn't quite what he seemed at first. But unlike Jane, Faye's situation had a time limit. 7 years and she'd be free. There was no reason to let her heart get tangled up in anything more complicated. She repeated that to herself as she finally blew out the lamp and settled into sleep. She repeated it even more firmly the next day when Grayson smiled at something she said, and her pulse jumped in a way it definitely shouldn't. This was an arrangement, nothing more. In 7 years, she'd leave this ranch and build the life she'd been dreaming about. Getting attached would only make that harder. But as autumn deepened into winter, avoiding attachment became increasingly difficult. Grayson was just so decent, so unexpectedly kind. When she mentioned missing music, he dug out his mother's old fiddle and played for her in the evenings, rusty at first but improving with practice. When the first frost came and she shivered despite her shawl, he brought her a warmer coat that had belonged to his mother. When she cut her hand chopping vegetables, he tended it himself, his touch gentle and sure. And there were moments, brief, charged moments, when their eyes would meet across the room and something unspoken would pass between them. Moments when their hands would brush, reaching for the same thing, and neither would pull away immediately. Moments when Faye would catch him watching her and wonder what he was thinking. The first snow came in December, dusting the world in white. Faye had always loved snow, and she couldn't help the delighted laugh that escaped when she saw it through the window. "Want to go out in it?" Grayson asked, looking up from the harness he was mending. "Really? Why not? The chores are done and it's not too cold yet." They bundled up and went outside, and Faye immediately tilted her face to the sky, catching snowflakes on her tongue like a child. When she looked at Grayson, he was grinning at her, a real, full smile she'd never seen before. "What?" she asked, self-conscious. "Nothing. Just nice to see you happy." They walked around the property, their breath puffing white in the air. The world was silent except for the crunch of snow under their boots. Near the barn, Grayson bent down and scooped up a handful of snow, packing it into a ball. Faye's eyes widened. "You wouldn't dare." His grin turned mischievous, and he threw the snowball. It hit her shoulder, exploding into powder. She gasped in mock outrage and immediately bent to make her own ammunition. What followed was the most fun she'd had in years, both of them laughing and dodging and throwing snow until they were covered in it. Finally, Grayson called a truce, both of them breathless and pink-cheeked. They were standing close, and Faye could see snowflakes caught in his dark hair and eyelashes. Her heart hammered in her chest, and she knew it wasn't from the exertion. "We should get inside," Grayson said, his voice rougher than usual. "Warm up by the fire." "Yes," Faye agreed, though she didn't move. Neither did he. For a long moment they just stood there, snow falling around them, something building between them that neither seemed quite ready to name. Then a gust of wind broke the spell, and they hurried inside. That night, warming by the fire with cups of hot tea, Faye tried to convince herself that what she'd felt was just the cold making her confused. But she knew that was a lie. She was developing feelings for Grayson Oakley, deep feelings that went far beyond gratitude or friendship. And that was dangerous. Christmas came, quiet and simple. Grayson brought home a small pine tree and they decorated it with strings of popcorn and paper ornaments Faye made from old newspapers. On Christmas morning, she found a package wrapped in brown paper on the kitchen table. "What's this?" she asked. "Open it and see." Inside was a book, brand new, not a used copy like the ones in his mother's collection. The title read Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. "I rode into town last week and asked the shopkeeper what books young women liked," Grayson explained, looking almost shy. "He recommended this one." Faye ran her fingers over the cover, touched beyond words. "This is too much. You've already given me so many books. This one is just yours, not my mother's, yours, something to keep when." He trailed off, not finishing the sentence. "When I leave," Faye finished mentally. "When my 7 years are up." "Thank you," she said softly. "I have something for you too, though it's not nearly as fine." She retrieved her own package from the bedroom. Inside were 2 pairs of socks she'd knitted from wool she'd unraveled from an old sweater of his mother's and reknitted. She'd worked on them in secret over the past month. Late at night, after he'd fallen asleep, Grayson held them up, examining her handiwork. "These are perfect. I always need more socks. They're not much there from you. That makes them valuable." The way he said it, the look in his eyes when he did, made Faye's breath catch. This was getting complicated in ways she hadn't expected. They spent Christmas Day together, cooking a special dinner and playing cards by the fire. It was domestic and peaceful, and Faye found herself wishing it could always be like this. But 7 years wasn't forever. Eventually, this arrangement would end, and she'd have to figure out what came next. Winter deepened, and the work shifted to indoor tasks. Faye mended clothes, made preserves from the root cellar vegetables, baked bread that filled the house with warmth and good smells. Grayson worked on equipment repairs and did the minimum outdoor work necessary to keep the animals fed and sheltered. They spent more time together in the house, and the proximity made everything more intense. Faye became acutely aware of every gesture, every glance. She noticed the way Grayson's eyes followed her as she moved around the kitchen, the way his voice softened when he spoke to her, the way he always made sure she had the warmest seat by the fire, and she knew with growing certainty that his feelings were changing too. The crisis came in January during a fierce blizzard. The temperature dropped dangerously low, and the wind howled around the house like a living thing. Grayson had to go out multiple times to check on the animals, coming back half frozen each time. After his 3rd trip, Faye insisted he sit by the fire while she heated water for tea. When she brought him the cup, their fingers touched as they always did, but this time neither pulled away. The touch lengthened, became a handhold, then Grayson was pulling her down to sit beside him. "Faye," he said, his voice rough. "I need to tell you something." Her heart pounded. "What?" "This arrangement, it's not working anymore." Cold fear flooded through her. "What do you mean? Have I done something wrong?" "No, God, no. You've done everything right. That's the problem." He was still holding her hand, his grip almost desperate. "I can't keep pretending this is just an employer and employee situation. I can't keep pretending I don't feel what I feel." "What do you feel?" She barely whispered the question. "I'm falling in love with you." The words came out in a rush, like he'd been holding them back for too long. "I've been falling since that first day in the rain when you looked at me like I was a miracle instead of just another buyer. And I know I shouldn't. I know you're in a position where you can't freely choose, and that makes this all kinds of wrong, but I can't help it. I'm in love with you, Faye Anderson." Tears sprang to her eyes. Grayson, you don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know. And I need you to know that it doesn't change anything about the arrangement. You still have your freedom in 7 years, maybe sooner if I can save enough to pay off the debt early. You're not obligated to feel anything for me. I just couldn't keep it inside anymore. Faye's mind was spinning. He loved her. This good, kind man loved her, and what if I wanted it to change things? She heard herself say, his eyes snapped to hers. What? What if I told you I was falling in love with you too? The hope that blazed in his face was almost painful to see. Are you? Yes. The admission felt like freedom. I've been trying not to because I thought it would be foolish, getting attached when this is temporary. But I can't help it either. You're the first person in so long who's treated me like I matter, who's been kind without expecting anything in return. How could I not fall in love with you? Grayson reached up and cupped her face with his free hand, his touch reverent. You're sure, because I need you to be sure. I won't have you feeling trapped or obligated. I'm sure. And she was. Despite all logic and reason, she was absolutely certain. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. She didn't want. When his lips met hers, it was gentle and questioning and perfect. Faye kissed him back, pouring all her confused, overwhelming feelings into the contact. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. I want to tear up that contract, Grayson said. Burn it and never think about it again. But the debt? I don't care about the debt. I'll pay it off myself. You shouldn't be bound to me by obligation. Faye shook her head. That's $300 you've already spent, plus room and board for months. I won't let you spend more because of my father's mistakes. Then stay because you want to, not because you have to. I do want to stay, but I want to keep working to pay the debt. It's a matter of pride, Grayson. Can you understand that? He searched her face, then nodded slowly. I can understand that, but promise me something. What? Promise me that if you ever want to leave for any reason, you'll tell me. The debt be damned. Your happiness matters more than money. I promise. She rested her forehead against his. But I don't want to leave. I want to stay right here with you. They kissed again, longer this time, and when they finally settled by the fire together, Faye curled against Grayson's side with his arm around her shoulders. Outside, the blizzard raged, but inside, everything felt right for the first time in years. The winter passed with new warmth between them. They were careful, maintaining propriety even as their feelings deepened. Grayson still slept by the fire, Faye still in the bedroom. But now there were stolen kisses in the barn and long conversations that stretched late into the night. There were touches that lingered and looks that spoke volumes. When spring finally arrived, the ranch exploded with work. Grayson hired 2 temporary hands for calving season, and Faye found herself cooking for 4 instead of 2. The men were respectful, clearly warned by Grayson to be on their best behavior. They called her Miss Faye and thanked her politely for every meal. One evening, after the hired hands had retired to the bunkhouse, Grayson found Faye in the garden, planting seeds for the summer vegetables. Need help? He asked. I thought you'd be exhausted after working all day. I'm never too tired to spend time with you. He knelt beside her and they worked together in companionable silence for a while, the setting sun painting everything gold. Finally, Grayson sat back on his heels and said, I've been thinking. About what? About us. About the future. Faye's hands stilled in the dirt. Go on. I know we said we'd wait until the debt is paid before making any real plans, but I can't help thinking that's a waste of time. Life's too short and too uncertain to put off happiness. What are you saying? He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object. A ring, simple gold with a tiny blue stone. This was my mother's. I want you to have it. I want you to marry me, Faye. Her breath caught. But the debt, I'll pay it off. Tomorrow if you want. Or we can keep the arrangement as is and you can work it off over time. I don't care about that. I just want you to be my wife, not my employee. I want to build a real life with you, not one defined by obligation. Tears blurred Faye's vision. Are you sure? Marriage is permanent, Grayson. You can't take it back if you change your mind. I'm not going to change my mind. I've never been more certain of anything. He took her hand, heedless of the dirt on it, and met her eyes. Will you marry me? Yes. The word came out choked with emotion. Yes, I'll marry you. He slipped the ring on her finger and it fit perfectly, like it had been waiting for her all along. Then he was pulling her into his arms and kissing her, and Faye felt like she was flying. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the Fort Stockton church. Sheriff Brennan gave her away, and the preacher's wife stood as witness. The 2 hired hands attended, grinning broadly. Faye wore a dress she'd made from fabric Grayson bought in town, not white, because that seemed foolish for a ranch wife, but a soft blue that matched the stone in her ring. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Grayson kissed her in front of everyone, and Faye didn't care who saw. This was her husband, her future, her home. After the ceremony, they had a small celebration at the ranch, cake and coffee and music from Grayson's fiddle. The hired hands left early, tactfully giving the newlyweds privacy. Finally, it was just Faye and Grayson, standing on the porch watching the stars come out. Happy? Grayson asked, his arm around her waist. Happier than I ever thought possible. She leaned into him. A year ago, I couldn't have imagined this. I was so lost, so afraid of what would become of me. And now you're stuck with a stubborn rancher in the middle of nowhere. Now I'm exactly where I want to be. That night, Faye didn't sleep in the bedroom alone. They shared the bed as husband and wife, and Grayson was gentle and patient and everything she could have hoped for. In his arms, she felt safe and cherished and loved. The next morning, over breakfast, Grayson pulled out the auction papers. What should we do with these? Faye looked at the documents that had once represented her worst nightmare. Burn them. They went outside together and Grayson lit a match. They watched as the papers caught fire, the ink and words curling and blackening. When the last scrap had turned to ash, Faye felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She was no longer bound by her father's debt. She was here by choice, by love. Free, she murmured. Free, Grayson agreed, pulling her close. Life settled into a new rhythm. Faye was no longer a hired worker but a full partner in the ranch. She learned to help with the cattle and horses, to mend fences and brand calves. She also continued the household work, but now it felt different. She was caring for their home, their life together. Summer came hot and dry. They worked hard during the long days and fell into bed exhausted each night. But there were good moments, too, swimming in the creek to escape the heat, sitting on the porch in the evenings with cold lemonade, dancing in the kitchen while Faye cooked dinner. In August, Faye realized she'd missed her monthly courses. She waited another month to be sure, then told Grayson over breakfast one morning, I think I'm expecting. He looked up from his eggs, eyes wide. Really? I'm fairly certain. I've been feeling sick in the mornings and I'm late and… She trailed off, suddenly nervous. They'd never specifically discussed children, but her fears evaporated when Grayson's face broke into the biggest smile she'd ever seen. He was around the table in an instant, pulling her to her feet and spinning her around. We're having a baby, he shouted, his joy infectious. We're having a baby, Faye agreed, laughing. He set her down carefully as if she might break. Are you happy about it? I'm terrified and thrilled in equal measure. But yes, I'm happy. They went to see the doctor in Fort Stockton the next week, who confirmed what Faye already knew. The baby would come in early spring. Grayson immediately began making plans. They'd need a cradle, more supplies. Maybe they should expand the house to add another bedroom. The baby won't need a separate room for at least a year, Faye pointed out, amused by his enthusiasm. But we should be prepared. Over the following months, Grayson fussed over her like she was made of glass. He insisted she rest more, work less. Faye let him have his way on the big things while quietly continuing to do most of her regular tasks. She felt healthy and strong, and she wasn't going to spend 6 months sitting idle. Winter came again, their second together. Faye's belly grew round and full, the baby moving inside her. Grayson would rest his hand on her stomach, marveling every time he felt a kick. "Strong little one," he'd say. "Takes after the mother." Christmas was even better than the previous year. They had a larger tree, more decorations. Grayson gave Faye a rocking chair he'd spent weeks making in secret. She gave him a new hat she'd ordered from a catalog. They sat by the fire, Faye rocking gently, and talked about names and the future. "If it's a boy, I'd like to name him after your father," Faye said. "If that's all right with you." Grayson looked surprised. "My father was named James Oakley. You'd want that. He helped build this ranch, this life. It seems fitting to honor him. And if it's a girl, Rose, after the first flowers that bloomed when I came here, a reminder of new beginnings." He reached over and took her hand. "Rose Oakley, I like it." The baby came on a cold March night. Faye's labor started just after dinner, and Grayson rode like hell to fetch the midwife from town. The next 12 hours were the hardest of Faye's life, but she got through them with Grayson holding her hand and the midwife's calm guidance. When the baby finally came, screaming and red-faced, the midwife announced, "It's a boy." Faye held her son for the first time and felt her heart expand in ways she didn't know were possible. He was perfect, with a shock of dark hair and tiny fists that waved in the air. "James," she whispered. "Hello, James." Grayson looked at them both with tears running down his face. "He's beautiful. You're both beautiful. Do you want to hold him?" Grayson took his son carefully, cradling him like precious cargo. The baby quieted immediately, seeming to sense his father's protective presence. Watching them together, Faye thought about how far she'd come. From that awful day in the rain to this moment of perfect joy, it seemed impossible that it was all the same life. James was an easy baby, happy and healthy. He nursed well and slept in stretches long enough for Faye to recover from the birth. Grayson was a devoted father, walking the floor with the baby at night, changing nappies without complaint, singing him lullabies in his rough voice. As spring turned to summer, Faye regained her strength and returned to her regular work. James went everywhere with her, either in her arms or in a sling Grayson fashioned. The baby seemed to love the ranch, gurgling happily at the horses and cows. "He'll be a rancher like his father," Grayson predicted, bouncing James on his knee. "Or maybe a banker or a lawyer or a teacher," Faye countered. "We'll let him choose." "Fair enough." That evening, after James was asleep in his cradle, Faye and Grayson sat on the porch watching the sunset. It was one of those perfect Texas evenings, warm but not hot, with a light breeze carrying the scent of sage. "Do you ever think about that day?" Faye asked. "The auction?" "Sometimes." "Why?" "I was just thinking about how different things could have been. If you hadn't been there, if you hadn't bid, I don't like to imagine it." Grayson reached over and laced his fingers through hers. "But I was there. I did bid. And everything worked out the way it was supposed to." "You believe that? That things happen for a reason?" "I believe that sometimes terrible circumstances lead to unexpected blessings. I believe that you were meant to be here with me, building this life." "I believe that too." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the colors fade from the sky. Inside, James made a small noise in his sleep but didn't wake. "I want more," Faye said suddenly. "More what?" "More of this. More children, more years, more life with you. I want to grow old here, Grayson. I want to see our children grow up and have children of their own. I want to sit on this porch when we're both gray and weathered and remember all of this." He squeezed her hand. "That's exactly what I want too, for as long as we're given." Time moved forward, bringing changes. James took his first steps, said his first words, grew from a baby into a toddler. When he was 2, Faye discovered she was expecting again. This time, the pregnancy felt easier because she knew what to expect. She also had a toddler to chase, which kept her busy and distracted. Their daughter Rose was born on a sunny September afternoon, the labor much faster than it had been with James. She came into the world with a full head of auburn hair like her mother's and lungs that could wake the dead. "She's fierce," the midwife observed. "This one knows her own mind." Faye laughed, exhausted but elated. "She'll fit right in here then." James was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything. Grayson had to constantly remind him to be gentle, that babies were fragile. But James took his role as big brother seriously, always making sure Rose had her blanket and telling her stories she was too young to understand. With 2 children, life became even busier. But Faye had never been happier. The house that had felt so empty and quiet when she first arrived was now full of noise and laughter and life. Every day brought new challenges and new joys. The ranch prospered. Grayson's hard work and careful planning paid off, and they were able to hire permanent help, 2 brothers who built a small cabin on the edge of the property. With extra hands, Grayson could focus more on his family, spending time teaching James about the horses and animals, rocking Rose to sleep at night, helping Faye with the endless work of running a household. When Faye's original 7-year mark came and went, they barely noticed. She wasn't keeping track anymore. That contract, those papers they'd burned years ago, felt like something from another lifetime. She wasn't here because of debt or obligation. She was here because this was home. One evening, when James was 5 and Rose was 3, Faye stood in the doorway watching Grayson play with the children. He was on his hands and knees, pretending to be a horse while both kids rode on his back, shrieking with laughter. His hat had fallen off, and his hair was disheveled, and he looked absolutely ridiculous and completely happy. He glanced up and caught her watching, his face breaking into that smile that still made her heart skip. "Come join us," he called. "This horse needs a rider who weighs more than 20 pounds. She laughed and crossed the room, and James and Rose immediately clamored for her to ride too. They all ended up in a laughing pile on the floor, the children crawling over them like puppies. Later, after the kids were asleep, Faye and Grayson lay in their bed, the window open to let in the cool night air. "Thank you," Faye said into the darkness. "For what? For saving me. For loving me. For giving me all of this." "You saved yourself," Grayson said, turning to face her. "I just gave you a safe place to land. You gave me everything." He kissed her forehead. "We gave each other everything. That's how love works." She settled into his arms, listening to his heartbeat, and thought about how true that was. They'd both been alone in their own ways when they met her, desperate and afraid, him isolated and lonely. Together, they'd built something neither could have created alone. More years passed, bringing more changes. James started school in Fort Stockton, riding in with Grayson once a week to stay with a family in town. Rose followed 2 years later, though she complained loudly about having to sit still and learn letters when she'd rather be outside with the animals. Faye found she was pregnant again at 32, a surprise but a welcome one. This time it was another boy whom they named Daniel. Then, 3 years after that, another daughter they called Lucy. Their family grew, and so did the ranch. They added more acres, more cattle. The house was expanded to include 2 more bedrooms and a proper dining room. The children grew like weeds, loud and wild and wonderful. Through it all, Grayson and Faye remained devoted to each other. They still sat on the porch in the evenings when they could steal a moment alone. They still danced in the kitchen. They still looked at each other across the dinner table with the same love that had bloomed that winter day by the fire. Life wasn't always easy. There were hard seasons when the rain didn't come and the cattle suffered. There were illnesses that struck the children, sending Faye and Grayson into panicked vigils at bedsides. There were disagreements and frustrations and the normal struggles of any marriage and family. But through all of it, they held together. They'd promised in sickness and health, for better or worse, and they meant it. James grew into a young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. He worked alongside Grayson, learning every aspect of the business. Rose proved to have a gift with horses, able to gentle even the most stubborn animal. Daniel was quieter, preferring books to outdoor work, and Faye delighted in helping him learn. Lucy was still young, but already showing signs of being as fierce and determined as her namesake Flower. On a summer evening when James was 15 and Lucy was 6, the whole family gathered on the expanded porch for dinner. It was something they did often in good weather. Everyone crowded around the long table Grayson had built, passing bowls of food and talking over each other in the way of large families. Faye looked around at her children, her husband, the life they'd built together, and felt overwhelming gratitude. This was what happiness looked like. Not perfect, not without struggle, but real and full and worth every hard moment that had led here. After dinner, James took the younger children to feed the chickens, leaving Faye and Grayson alone for a moment. Rose had gone to check on a horse that had seemed lame that morning. 17 years, Grayson said, reaching across the table to take Faye's hand. Has it been that long, since that day in the rain? 17 years since I saw you on that platform and knew I couldn't let anyone else take you home. Did you know then that it would lead to all of this? No, I just knew I had to protect you. Everything else was a gift I never expected. Faye stood and moved to his side, and he pulled her down to sit on his lap like they were courting teenagers, instead of a married couple in their 40s with 4 children. Best $300 I ever spent, he said, making her laugh. You're never going to let me forget that, are you? Never. Although you've more than paid it back with 17 years of the best cooking in West Texas. She swatted his shoulder playfully. Is that all I'm good for? Cooking? That and making the house beautiful, bearing my children, running the ranch, teaching me to read for pleasure, introducing me to poetry, making every day better than the last. He paused. Should I go on? I think that covers it. She kissed him softly. I love you, Grayson Oakley. I love you, Faye Oakley. They sat together watching the sun set over their land, their children's voices carrying on the evening air, the ranch peaceful around them. This was home. This was family. This was everything worth having. When full darkness fell, they called the children in and settled everyone for the night. The older kids could manage themselves now, but Daniel still liked to be tucked in, and Lucy needed a story. Faye and Grayson divided the duties as they always did, working together as a team. Finally, alone in their room, they prepared for bed. It was such a normal routine, done thousands of times, but Faye never took it for granted. She'd learned young that nothing was guaranteed. Every ordinary evening was a blessing. Do you ever wonder, she said as they settled under the quilts, what happened to all those people from that day? The other bidders, the auctioneer. Sometimes. But mostly I just feel grateful it was me who won, that I got to bring you home. I'm grateful too. For all of it, even the hard parts, they led me here to you, to this life. We're not done yet, Grayson said, pulling her close. Still got a lot of years ahead of us. Good. I want them all with you." Years continued to unfold like pages in a book. James took over more of the ranch work as Grayson slowed down slightly, though he'd never admit he was getting older. Rose married a neighboring rancher's son in a ceremony that had Faye crying happy tears the entire time. Daniel went off to college in Austin, planning to become a lawyer, making Faye burst with pride even as she missed him terribly. Lucy showed signs of being a teacher, gathering the other ranch children for impromptu lessons. Grandchildren started arriving first. James and his wife had a son. Then Rose had twin girls. The ranch house that had once been so empty now overflowed with life whenever everyone came for Sunday dinners or holidays. Faye's hair turned silver, and lines creased Grayson's face around his eyes and mouth. His hands, which had once been so strong and certain, developed a slight tremor. But he still played the fiddle on special occasions, and he still danced with Faye in the kitchen when the mood struck. On their 25th anniversary, the children threw them a party. It seemed like half of Fort Stockton turned out, filling the ranch with noise and celebration. Sheriff Brennan, now retired and white-haired, pulled Faye aside at one point. "I'm glad I was wrong about you," he said with a smile. "Wrong about me? That day I came to check on you, I was worried. Most of those auction situations end badly, but you two proved that sometimes good things can come from hard circumstances." "We were lucky," Faye said, though she knew it was more than luck. It was choice, day after day, to love each other and build something lasting. As the party wound down and the last guests left, Faye and Grayson found themselves alone on the porch again, their favorite spot, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. 25 years, Faye marveled. How did that happen, one day at a time? Grayson's arm was around her shoulders, familiar and warm. "Just like the next 25 will happen. You think we've got another 25 in us? I plan to. Got to stick around to see how all those grandchildren turn out." Faye laughed. "There's going to be a lot of them if Rose and James keep going at this rate. Fine by me. The more the merrier." They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes from decades of companionship. Faye thought about that terrified young woman standing in the rain, certain her life was over. If she could go back and tell her younger self how things would turn out, she'd never believe it. Misery and fear had somehow transformed into joy and love, and a life richer than she'd ever imagined possible. "Thank you," Grayson said quietly. "For what?" "For saying yes that first time when I asked if you could ride. For saying yes when I asked you to marry me. For saying yes to this life, every day for 25 years. Thank you for asking. For seeing me when I was invisible. For loving me when I didn't know how to love myself." He turned and cupped her face in his weathered hands, looking at her with the same intensity he had when they first kissed by the fire all those years ago. "I'll love you until my last breath, Faye Oakley, and probably after that too." "That's good," she whispered, "because I feel the same way." They kissed under the stars, two people who'd found each other in the storm and built a shelter that had grown into a home, a family, a legacy. More years passed, bringing the inevitable changes that come with age. Grayson's health declined slowly, his body finally giving in to decades of hard ranch work. He developed a bad knee, then trouble with his heart. The doctor prescribed medicine and rest, both of which Grayson grumbled about constantly. "I'm not an invalid," he protested when Faye insisted he let James handle the heavy work. "No, but you're not 25 anymore either. Let our son help. That's what family is for." Eventually, he accepted his limitations, though he never stopped being involved in the ranch operations. He just supervised more and did less physical work. Faye's health remained good, though she too moved slower than she once had. Her hands developed arthritis that made sewing difficult, but she adapted, finding other ways to be useful. They were in their 60s when Grayson had his first serious heart episode. It happened in the barn, and thank God James was there to catch him when he fell. The doctor prescribed complete rest, which Grayson actually listened to this time because the incident had scared him. For weeks, he stayed in bed or in his chair by the window, restless and frustrated. Faye brought him books and meals, sat with him for hours talking or just being present. The children visited constantly, bringing the grandchildren who clambered over their grandfather with innocent disregard for his fragile health. "I'm not ready yet," Grayson said one evening when it was just the two of them. "Not ready to leave you and all of this." "Then don't," Faye said firmly, though fear clenched her heart. "You fight and stay here with me. We still have more years to share." He did fight, gradually regaining strength. He never returned to his full health, but he was able to move around again, to sit on the porch, to play with the grandchildren. The doctors said it was remarkable, but Faye knew it was stubbornness and love that kept him going. They celebrated their 30th anniversary quietly, just the two of them and their immediate family. Grayson was 72 now, Faye 68. They'd lived full lives, seen their children grow and thrive, welcomed grandchildren into the world. They'd survived droughts and storms, financial hardships and personal losses. Through it all, they'd held each other up. "No regrets?" Faye asked that evening. "Not a single one. You? Only that I didn't meet you sooner. We met exactly when we were supposed to. Everything happened the way it needed to." That was true, Faye knew. If they'd met earlier, they would have been different people. The auction, as terrible as it had been, had brought her to him, and from that darkness had come so much light. Grayson lived another 5 years, slowly declining but never losing his sharp mind or his dry sense of humor. He died peacefully in his sleep at 77, with Faye beside him, holding his hand as she'd been holding it for over 3 decades. The grief was crushing, a physical weight on Faye's chest that made breathing difficult. They'd been together for 35 years, more than half her life. The house felt empty without his presence, even though it was full of children and grandchildren who'd come to mourn. At the funeral, people shared stories about Grayson, his fairness, his kindness, his dedication to family. The preacher talked about his devotion to Faye, how their love had been an inspiration to everyone who knew them. Faye stood by the grave, dry-eyed because she'd already cried herself empty, and said her private goodbye. "Thank you for saving me. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for every single day." In the weeks that followed, she had to learn how to live alone again. The children wanted her to move in with one of them, but she refused. This ranch was her home, full of memories of Grayson. She couldn't leave it. She settled into a new routine, finding comfort in familiar tasks. She cooked for one, tended the garden, read the books they'd shared. Every evening she sat on the porch in her rocking chair, Grayson's empty chair beside her, and watched the sunset. She wasn't alone for long. James and his family lived on the ranch, so there were always people around. Rose visited weekly with her children. Daniel came home from Austin every few months. Lucy, now a teacher in Fort Stockton, stopped by most days after school. The grandchildren multiplied. Eventually, there were 13 of them, ranging from grown adults to small children. They all called her Grammy and loved to hear her stories about the old days, about their grandfather and the ranch. Faye lived to be 83, still sharp and engaged with the world around her. On a spring morning very much like the one when James had been born, she died quietly in her sleep, in the bed she'd shared with Grayson for so many years. Her funeral was even larger than his had been. She'd touched many lives in Fort Stockton through her kindness, her charity work, her quiet presence in the community. The preacher talked about her remarkable life, how she'd overcome hardship to build something beautiful and lasting. They buried her next to Grayson on a hill overlooking the ranch, where wildflowers bloomed and the wind whispered through the grass. The gravestone read, "Faye Anderson Oakley, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother." And underneath, words James had chosen. "She was sheltered in the storm and became our sunshine." The ranch continued through the generations. James passed it to his son, who passed it to his. The house was expanded and modernized, but the core remained the same. And on the mantel, in what everyone still called Grammy's room, they kept a small wooden box containing two things: a gold ring with a blue stone and a photograph from Faye and Grayson's wedding day, both of them young and happy and in love. The story of how they met became family legend, told and retold at gatherings. The romance that started in rain and desperation, that grew into something strong and lasting. The cowboy who spent $300 to save a woman he didn't know, and the woman who repaid him with a lifetime of love. Their great-great-grandchildren would sometimes ask if it was really true, if Grammy Faye had really been auctioned in the rain. And the elders would smile and say yes, it was true, every word. And that terrible day had led to the most beautiful love story any of them had ever known, because sometimes in the midst of the worst storms, shelter appears in unexpected forms. And sometimes when someone reaches out a hand in kindness, you hold on tight and never let go. That was the lesson of Faye and Grayson Oakley. That was their legacy, passed down through generations. Love born from compassion, strengthened by commitment, lasting beyond death itself. And on quiet evenings, when the wind blew just right across the Texas plains, people swore you could still feel their presence on that porch. Two souls who'd found each other in the storm and built a shelter that became a home, a family, a love for the ages.